All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to Duran live chat number 16. Can everyone hear me? Pax Bella says no video, no audio. Can people hear me out there? If you can, let me know on the chat. Just drop a quick message and let us know that you can hear us. Okay, Thomas says indeed. Great. Great. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to Duran live chat number 16. Thank you for coming out and watching us. With me today, I have in Moscow, the one and only host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Hello, Peter. How are you?
Great to be with you guys again. All
right. And in Moscow, we have international affairs and security analyst, Mr. Mark Sleboda. Mark. All right. And in London, we have the Oracle of London, the Duran editor-in-chief, Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, how are you?
I'm very well. Alex, the Oracle of Delphi was famous for its ambiguous answers. I hope to keep mine precise and clear.
Well, you're the London Eye. I like that more. Okay.
London Eye. Okay. We'll play between the two every now and then. London Eye and Oracle of London. See what the users like more. Which one do the users like more? I like Oracle of London.
Well, the London Eye goes up and down. So
yeah. That's good. Ooh, that's good. That's profound. Yeah.
All right.
I like undocumented Greek migrant.
Well, there you go.
Okay, everybody, welcome. Imre sent a super chat. £5. Whose idea was the Kalashnikov since 1947 Duran Wing t-shirt arriving next week? Great. We hope you enjoy that shirt. Kalashnikov. Peter, Kalashnikov's a very famous international Russian.
But there's more. Yeah, there are more bootleg versions than the original. It is the most bootleg reproduced weapon, I guess, in modern history. Okay, I mean, when I was in Afghanistan interviewing President Karzai, you had Afghan soldiers all decked out in the American gear, you know, the desert gear and all that, but they all carried Kalashnikovs. They didn't carry any American arms. Everyone carried a Kalashnikov.
It is by far the most used weapon in the world.
All right.
Who invented it? Who invented it? Who invented it? Does anybody know? I mean, Mr. Kalashnikov, Mikhail Kalashnikov.
Well, yeah. I mean, he developed part of it.
Yeah, but Stalin asked him what it should be called, and Stalin said, "No, we're going to use your name." Yeah.
Awesome. And Liberty Cat says she got her Russian MAGA shirt. All right, great. That's a good shirt. Hope you like it. Mark, let's get to some questions that people sent in before we get going with the live chat. People are asking about an update on Syria and Idlib. You have a quick update? What's going on?
Yeah, okay. So we just had another Astana meeting that was a talking shop in that absolutely nothing was decided and everything was put off again. The same boilerplate statements out. We still have the three-way Mexican standoff going on between Russia and Syria on one side, Turkey and the jihadis in Idlib and across the Jarablus corridor on the second side, and on the third side is the United States and the Syrian Democratic Forces, i.e. mostly Kurdish YPG, occupying the east of Syria on the east side of the Euphrates River. Lately, Turkey, Erdogan was announcing that he wanted to seize the northern part of eastern Ukraine, eastern Syria as well, and clear it, by ethnically cleanse it of terrorists, what he calls terrorists, meaning the Kurds, the YPG, i.e. the U.S. allies. And in response, the U.S. started putting up observation posts, little military bases, all along the Turkish border there. Turkey is furious and has been demanding that the U.S. Dismantle them. Of course, it's not going to do so. Around Idlib, terrorists, the jihadis keep conducting attacks nearly every day. west into Latakia, south into Hama, and east into West Aleppo, where we recently had this chemical attack incident where Al-Qaeda openly claimed that they were responsible for a chlorine gas attack on a Syrian government-held town in West Aleppo province. The U.S. government has since tried to claim that it was the Syrian government with tear gas, rather than Al-Qaeda openly claiming that they did it. I'd say the only other thing of note is that the Syrian government has again begun massing forces near Idlib. Turkey is extremely angry about this. They refuse to fulfill their part of the Idlib memorandum, which requires them to clear the demilitarized zone of Al-Qaeda, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the Turkestan Islamic Party and other extremists. They refuse to attack them. Their proxies, the National Liberation Forces, have fought a few scuffles with them for territory, who controls what rent in what town. But the Turkish government obviously has no intent of taking on Al-Qaeda and fulfilling the memorandum. They have since moved regular Turkish military forces further south into Syria, out of Idlib, into both Hama and West Aleppo, obviously there to counter the buildup of Syrian government forces in case the Syrian government and Russia actually decide to liberate Idlib. So bad situation, three-way Mexican standoff, everyone hoping that the fighting involves the other two guys and that they can be the one to clean up whoever's left. And that's basically where we are today. And the U.S. has, out of the blue, called for the cancellation of the Astana format, i.e., dealing with the crisis between Russia and Iran on one side and Turkey representing the jihadis on the other side. But no one really cares what the U.S. says.
And they've even called for a no-fly zone, just out of the blue. It's amazing to me the last couple of days.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Alexander, a question from Asma wants to know, what do you think of the CDU in Germany?
Well, I think that what is now very clear from the latest election in Germany of this person who I'm going to call her AKK. Because,
good idea. That's what I call her too.
Because I still haven't got round to pronouncing her name properly. But if you actually look at it, the party is very split, because the person who was up against her, who is an enemy of Merkel, a known enemy of Merkel, Mr. Merz, the difference between them was just 50 votes out of a pool of around 1,000. So it shows that the CDU is becoming a very divided party between Merkel's supporters and her opponents. So I think the problem the CDU has is that Merkel and the line of policies that she's established are deeply unpopular with many people on the CDU grassroots. She's very connected now to a European integrationist, globalist, neoliberal policy, which is becoming increasingly discredited right across Europe. She has no real way to challenge that, no way of moving the CDU beyond that. And by leveraging in AKK as her lead, as a successor, she's trying to perpetuate this at a time when more and more people clearly within the CDU are becoming unhappy. I don't think this is a sustainable policy in the long term. I think there's going to be a major breakdown within the CDU within the next year or so. I think we're going to be seeing Merkel out much sooner than she expects, but I suspect that until that happens, we're going to see a continuing drift towards the AfD, this new populist party that is now eating away in the CDU's heartlands.
Right.
AKK is called in Germany, from what I've been told, Merkel 2.0. So that kind of answers the shortest answer.
or mini Merkel, which is the other one. I mean, she won't have Merkel's authority, the authority Merkel had, but she's going to try and continue her policies with half the party against her. It doesn't really look very sustainable to me.
All right. Last time they tried to put someone in power like that, it was Macron, and I think we can see what's going on there.
Well, exactly.
Thank you, Bobby, for your $20 super chat.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Because he continues to entertain me every single day.
There you go. And we're going to get to Macron. And actually, Peter, you can segue into it after you answer this one question, which is related, I think, a little bit to Macron. And it comes from Banayotis, who says there's going to be a UN conference in Morocco 10/11 on open, and they're going to discuss open borders. What are your thoughts on the UN pushing open borders?
First of all, it's non-binding, everyone, okay? The timing couldn't be worse, okay? Because you have all, it's Poland, it's Austria, it's Hungary. I think Italy's already said no. It was supposed to, the EU was supposed to go in as a bloc. I mean, obviously the United States is not interested in it. I looked at it very briefly. It is more of a declaration. There are very few details, and it skirts the issue of sovereignty, and it skirts the issue of each sovereign country's right to control its own borders. So this is just very badly written. It's just virtue signaling, okay? It's from the same loser elites that gave us everything else, okay? So it's a real non-starter. I mean, it is just virtue signaling. No country, no leader in his or her right mind would even get close to something. And it's just foolishness. It's simply foolishness.
All right, loser leaders. Peter, Macron, let's get into it.
Number one, before the chat here, I was just saying, we might have the most interesting 10 days of our life. We might lose Merkel, we might lose Theresa May, and Macron all in the same month. That would be pretty amazing. That'd be a great new Christmas, New Year's gift. Okay, but more seriously, what's really happened here is that Macron right now is a president with steel hands and clay legs. And there's a huge deficit of competence in him and legitimacy. And you have these two elements in play: lack of legitimacy, but he's constitutionally speaking, within the French Republic, he's still a very powerful person. The thing is that I'm going to be watching for, and I think it's going to happen relatively quickly. He was chosen from a casting couch by the elites, and they're going to have to start figuring out if this essentially, he's not even running for re-election, he's already a lame duck. Can this lame duck president serve their purposes? If he can't serve their purposes, then they're going to get rid of him in one form or another, and it will be quite ceremonial, believe me. They didn't put him there because they like him. They put him there because he was supposed to do a job for them, all right? So he went from a few weeks ago being the leader of the free world because Merkel has been shot down, and that now he has no credibility with among his own people in France. I mean, come on, guys. There's no such thing as French culture. Nationalism is the opposite of patriotism. It's time for this guy to go. Okay, I mean, this is just speaking babble, nonsense. Alexander Mercouris, you're disgusted. I'm glad. Go ahead.
No. I mean, I agree with all that you say, Peter, except, of course, getting rid of the French president constitutionally in France is extremely difficult. I mean, it would require something that would be tantamount to a sort of legal coup. I mean, I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying it'd be very difficult to do, especially with a man as vain as Macron.
My point is that what's it going to take for him to resign? I agree with you. I mean, usually speaking, getting rid of him is near impossible. Okay.
Impossible.
Okay. Alexander, Secular Beast writes 18% approval now. Is that correct?
Well, that is correct. I mean, when I last saw it, it was 23%, but that was, that was a couple of days ago. And I mean, it's falling fast.
It was this morning.
It did drop to 18.
18. Well, there you go. I mean, somebody actually referred to him, the incredible shrinking president. I mean, Napoleon, he isn't.
The support for the yellow vests is 68 to 72%.
Well, there you go. So, I mean, it's he has.
Sorry, when Richard Nixon left office, he had 25% public approval. When Yanukovych was overthrown illegally, he had 25%. So Macron, learn a little bit about history. I know you're young.
Yeah.
I know your mother. I mean, your wife probably is telling you what to do. Okay, but learn a little bit about history.
The one thing
Still doing better than Poroshenko and Halat.
That's true. Well, he's in good company. Yeah.
The one thing I have to repeat again is, of course, that France is the country of revolutions. So if there is going to be a if you like, way of overthrowing a leader in a Western country, that country is more likely to be France than anywhere else. Difficult to see how it's going to happen, but I gather the police themselves are getting very angry at having to be hauled out all the time, brought out in the streets, and they're getting tired and they're getting frustrated, and many of them also disagree with him and don't like him either. And of course, the army doesn't like him because, of course, he sacked the chief of staff, and they wouldn't want to be sent out onto the streets. So it's not impossible this whole situation could crumble. We need to see the parliament, what's going to happen there. If the parliament rebels against him, then he is in real trouble. That's what I think.
He's going to envy Donald Trump's conundrum. Believe me, very soon.
Well, I mean, actually, there's a good point, Peter, because, of course, when he was raised up, when he became president, people were talking about him stemming the flow of populism, so-called. He was going to be the enemy of Donald Trump and all that. I mean, Donald Trump is, what, 45% approval?
Yeah, 45 to 50% in the US. You know what? Macron needs a yellow vest. If you think about the meaning of the yellow vest, you're in trouble and you don't want to be run over.
Yes.
He needs a yellow vest, right?
Yes. But what a total failure of the French political elite. I mean, they decided that they were going to control the election, that they were going to bring a neoliberal globalist. And whom did they find? They found Macron. I mean, really, this was the best they could do. And look where it's got them. I mean, what a crisis. If they'd allowed François Fillon to become president of France, we'd have had something that would have been slightly different from what we've got now, but we would have had an experienced president, and he would have been a much more successful person in controlling the situation. Leveraging Macron into power in that way has merely had the effect of radicalizing the French population.
All right, Mark, close out Macron, and let's close out this.
I think it's important to note that although this began as a protest over fuel taxes, this has morphed into much more. And at one hand, you had Macron handing out new taxes to the working class and the poor on fuel. And on the other hand, he's removing France's wealth tax and taxes on corporations, giving money back to the ultra rich. And this combination of things is what's really driving the Yellow Vest protesters. There's no one set of demand because there's no one group or leadership of the Yellow Vest protesters, which will be a problem for them as a movement, right? They're probably not. I've seen lists of demands going around the internet that is obviously shared by a lot of them. That includes, besides the bread and butter economic issues, also respect for other nations' sovereignty, pulling out of NATO, the foreign policy things, Frexit, other things as well. From what it appears, from what has been said of the protesters, that to a large extent they comprise the far right, quote, far right Le Pen voters on one side and the far left Mélenchon voters on the other side, which together in the first round of the French election got 41% of the vote. And we've seen that as Macron's numbers plummet, both of these two far left and far right parties go up. And this is something that we called out on Crosstalk. We've talked about it on the Duran before, that is absolutely necessary in European countries, but in the US as well, that in order to beat a hegemonic triangulated neoliberal center-right, center-left globalist center that you need to have far left and far right forces reaching around, understanding that they will never agree on everything. And obviously, outright racists and, can't be involved on one side and, and Stalinists on the other. But the two, particularly in France on economic issues, right? They're both statist parties, can find a lot in common. And this is exactly what we're seeing on the streets of France right now. Now, the hopeful is it can be this rage and this cooperation can then be translated from street protests into a real political movement and cooperation between far left and far right parties. That won't be easy, but that is absolutely what's necessary.
If it's going to happen, it has to happen pretty soon. So events could unfold very, very quickly. Again, it cuts both ways. When there is no centralized leadership, not even a set in stone list of demands, I mean, this actually gives oxygen for the movement to develop. But if it doesn't start coming together in a meaningful sense, and people in authority and an agenda that can appeal to the left and to the right, if they can't do that, then it's going to flicker away. So this is a very important moment that we're living in right now. The next couple of weeks are going to be key.
Yeah. Can I just finish with one little thought, building on something that Mark said about this being a revolt about taxes, about poor people being made to pay taxes at a time when the tax burden on the rich is being lifted. If you go all the way back to 1789, the Great Revolution in France, that is exactly what the issue was there. An out-of-touch elite, a rich that wasn't paying tax, and a tax burden that was falling over heavily on the poor.
All right, we have a super chat from Jay Krubug for Peter. Peter, could you comment on Poroshenko's immediate persecution of Orthodox clergy of the churches formerly under the Moscow Patriarchate?
Let me hand that one over to Alexander Mercouris.
Hand that to Alexander.
He's Greek Orthodox. I think he's in a much stronger position.
Well,
Alexander, answer that on Peter's behalf.
Well, I mean, it's not surprising because, of course, this is exactly what this whole situation in Ukraine is leading up to. Poroshenko persecutes anything and everything that has a connection to Russia. It was only a matter of time, in my opinion, so long as he remained president of Ukraine and so long as the Maidan movement, which he is a member, has the power in Ukraine, that they would come after the Russian Orthodox Church, or rather the Ukrainian branch of the Russian Orthodox Church. We have to see in that context. Poroshenko himself is not interested in church matters. He's not a religious man in any way. Orthodoxy is not what concerns him. It is Russia that is the issue. It is the connection to Russia that he wants to sever as far as possible. So, of course, he is now bringing out his SBU secret policeman to talk to church officials. He's pushing the people at the Lavelle in Kiev. This is a very important religious shrine because obviously this is where, to some extent, Orthodoxy began within the Russian-speaking lands. He is pushing very hard to bring a national church under his control and under the control of the Ukrainian government. And can I just say, anybody who is an Orthodox believer knows that national churches are simply not part of what the Orthodox Church is supposed to be about. There are patriarchs in various places. There's a patriarch in Moscow, a patriarch in Constantinople, in Jerusalem, in Antioch. There are churches in various countries, but the church, the Orthodox Church, is not supposed to be a nationalist body. But for Poroshenko, it clearly is. I don't know whether Mark wants to add anything about this, but there we are.
Yeah. So, what the reaction from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate has been very negative, of course, towards this. They have refused to comply, but we've already seen 40 Orthodox churches seized by the Putsch regime's forces and handed over to their separatist splinter church that supports their regime, right? And this is only going to continue. They will see this statement by the Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, as a green light to one by one seize the Lavra in Kiev and every Orthodox church and hand them over to compliant priests. And so Bartholomew will in the end be responsible for probably the greatest Orthodox on Orthodox violence, certainly in the modern history of the religion, and possibly ever. It is truly going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, the Patriarch is going to lose legitimacy, and a national church in Ukraine will never have legitimacy. Everybody loses. Mark, maybe
that crow. Yeah, maybe maybe that crow should go back in the cage. All right, we made a special appearance by Mark's crow.
Morgan, I think is
Morgan. Okay, great. Alexander, we have a super chat from Zariel. Since the U.S. has left the nuclear treaty, can other members force Israel to admit and enter new negotiations? And part two of the question is, would you consider connecting to other indie news sources? So, two unrelated questions, but Alexander.
Right. When the reference, I presume, to the nuclear treaty, because now we've had the US pulling out of several nuclear treaties, but I presume this is the one with Iran, since the subject of Israel has been discussed. Or is it because, of course, Israel itself has got intermediate nuclear weapons? We all know
yeah, I think that's what Zariel's referring to. If you're not there, just let us know in the chat. But I think he's referring to the INF and
the INF treaty.
Israel admitting that it does have.
Well, Israel doesn't admit that he's got these weapons, and I mean, we all know that it does, and it won't, and it will never agree to be party of any negotiation. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think the INF treaty is dead. I think there are some people in Russia who are perhaps not entirely sorry to see it go, because from their point of view, I mean, it actually ties their hands. So I think the INF treaty is dead. I don't think there's anything we could do to connect Israel to it, and I don't think there's any conceivable way that the present government of Israel is going to be party to any kind of nuclear weapons negotiations. And the reality is that the United States will never support negotiations of that nature which involve Israel. So I think that we can't, when the question is put, can we force Israel? That seems to be the idea. That can we persuade Israel or oblige Israel to participate in nuclear weapons negotiations? For the time being, it simply isn't going to happen. In 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, it may be different, but that is the reality today. Now, the second question was, I think, about alternative media.
Yeah, would we ever partner with other media news sources?
Well, we are absolutely open to that. I mean, we work with several. I mean, we've established good connections with the Strategic Culture Foundation. I mean, we cite other sites regularly. Zero Hedge, if Zero Hedge counts as an alternative site, I'm not sure that it does. It's almost become so important now that Moonabel, all of these. So, I mean, absolutely, we are fully open to doing so. We consider ourselves part of a community of alternative news sites, though we also have our own independent identity and our own specific outlook. And we believe and consider that we have our own contribution to bring.
All right, Peter, we have a super chat from Mike. From Mike V. The U.S. has supported peaceful protests has supported, quote, peaceful protesters in the Middle East and Ukraine with weapons. Is it time for Moscow to send ATGMs and Kalashnikovs to the peaceful protesters in Paris against their oppressive government?
No. I believe in international law, okay? And I do believe that the meddling that the Europeans and the Americans, what they do in the Middle East is, well, the results are for everyone to see. the meddling you do, arming of people, only creates chaos, and it creates despair, illegitimacy, and then it flows outside of your borders, out of those borders into your own. It's a lose-lose proposition. Two wrongs don't make a right. Okay, it should absolutely not do that, because there is the law of unintended consequences. It will come back and bite you in the ass. So no, I don't support it whatsoever.
I support the idea, if not the reality. We don't live in a world where taking the moral high ground has any benefit. I do not believe in an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Frankly, if you come at me and try to take my eye, I'm not going to screw around going for your eye. I'm going to take off your effing head. That's it.
All right. Mark, a super chat from Afterglow. Should Trump get rid of Bolton now for his part?
Be careful with Mark tonight, okay? I have vibe, okay?
Let's shift gears. Let's shift gears to something more peaceful. Let's shift stuff. And the executive. Mark, should Trump get rid of Bolton now for his part in the arrest of the Huawei executive behind his back?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Trump never should have brought Bolton into the administration in the first place. I mean, but it's looking like increasingly Bolton's administration rather than Trump's. And you can be certain that he is one of the principal ones behind the removal of Kelly, who he did not get along with. And Mattis is next. And it's long been discussed that Mad Dog, whom somehow is the restraining force behind this administration's, since it was captured by the neocons. Trump never should have brought him on in the first place, but I have not seen any gumption, any indication that Trump has expressed any displeasure with Bolton. Despite this and all of the other things he's done. And this is not the first time that Bolton has appeared to sabotage at least the Trump that sometimes comes out on Twitter, from Korea's, to Syria to here. But it looks like President Bolton rather than President Trump at this point. So yes. I don't see him getting rid of Bolton, although he certainly should. He never should have brought him in the first place.
It seems to me that Trump has just outsourced his foreign policy to Bolton. It seems really clear. And then we have this airhead that's going to be over at the United Nations. Well, she'll just be, she'll just be reading his talking points. Okay, Bolton is in a very powerful position, but this is Donald Trump. If he feels like too much limelight is being shed on Bolton, he could get rid of him in a heartbeat. I wouldn't put it past Trump, but we're not there yet.
All right, Alexander, we have a super chat from Bobby. If Macron leaves, who would you pick to replace him?
It's very difficult to say, but if Macron leaves, which would, as I say, be a situation which has no real precedent in France since the establishment of the Fifth Republic, I suspect that there would be major moves within the parliament and within the regional assemblies for some sort of provisional president to be appointed. Now, that might be a stopgap figure, but in that kind of situation, in the kind of political vacuum that would be created, that would be Marine Le Pen's opportunity. If she's going to become president of France soon, it would have to be in that kind of context. I am sure she is not trying to create at least not overtly trying to create that kind of political crisis, because if she did, it would be used against her. But if there was a crisis in France of that nature, if Macron is forced out in that way, in what would in effect be a kind of revolutionary situation, then she is clearly the kind of leader who, she's the obvious leader in some form to take over. How it would happen, I'm not sure.
Well, she's been very calculating in all of this. We haven't heard much from her or her supporters overtly, though they've been involved in some of these protests.
I think I
think really clearly Alexander Mercouris is right. I mean, when when your enemy or your enemies are in a circular firing squad, don't get in the middle of it. Just watch, okay, and let it be handed to her instead of her taking it. That's what she wants.
She's in it for the long game.
Exactly.
She's looking towards the next elections and gaining seats in the French Parliament as well, and in mayorships around the country, which is actually incredibly important in French politics.
Yes, I mean, I mean, perhaps the nearest comparison would be to the crisis that led to the emergence of the Fifth Republic, which is in 1958. I mean, there was a huge crisis then. There was threats of a military coup because of the crisis in Algeria. And out of it, in a very mysterious way that to some extent has still not been fully clarified, Charles de Gaulle became president of France. I can see something similar happening with Marine Le Pen at the moment. She is the obvious alternative if there is a crisis of that kind now. But Mark is absolutely right. She's playing a long game. It is right for her to do so. If she sets herself up at this moment in time as the leader of that movement, she will weaken the movement and she will weaken herself. She's playing the absolutely correct game of letting the thing play itself out.
Absolutely. The worst thing she could do is try to hijack it.
Exactly.
You look like a pure opportunist.
Sit back and work in the aftermath and try to collect the fruits of it.
Which is exactly what de Gaulle did in 58. And as I say, she's playing exactly that kind of game.
All right, Peter from Freddie wants to know, do you think that there is an anti-immigrant sentiment to the Yellow Vest protests, not at immigrants personally, but what immigration has done to France? So there's a clarification, not at immigrants, but what immigration has done.
Any really overt. I mean, I think what people are worried about is obviously if there's a inflow of unskilled labor, then it tends to drive down wages. And of course, that's what they're going to be worried about. This is really a working poor movement, at least its origins. And now other elements and groups are being involved in it. But I personally have not seen any overt anti-immigrant. I think it's more people are concerned about, as Mark pointed out, is breaks to the rich and making the poor pay for everything else. And of course, low wage earners would include people that have come into the country from outside. So, but I guess for 3 times now, I haven't come across any overt anti-immigration rhetoric.
On the popular list of demands that I have seen around the internet includes better control of immigration. Yeah. But I think it's also important to note that a very substantial number of the protesters out there, I wouldn't say the majority, definitely not, but there are plenty of immigrants, whether this is recent or, of non-French national French citizenship already, who are part of the protests, right?
It's about wages. It's about how to live. That's what it's about, and that affects all groups of people that are not. Yeah,
this is about class. This is about class.
All right, Gamba has a interesting comment on the chat, and I would like Alexander Mark to address it. Gamba says that Marine Le Pen is not very popular in France. Is the most hated person in France. She will never come to power. What do you guys think of that?
I think that there is some truth to this, in the sense that she is a divisive figure, partly, as I said, because she's been so misrepresented. General de Gaulle in France in the 50s was also a divisive figure. He is to some extent still in France. There's lots of people in France who don't think very well of de Gaulle. There are lots of people in France who don't think very well of Marine Le Pen. And that was how Macron became president, because they built up Marine Le Pen into this bogey, and they put up Macron against her. And that was how Macron got his 60% plus majority.
Screwed up the debate.
Exactly. She screwed up the debate. But I mean, that is how, as I say, he became president. But having said that, I'm not an unqualified supporter of Marine Le Pen by any means. There's much about her I don't particularly approve of. But the fact of the matter is, one of the reasons she is unpopular is because she says things that other French politicians are not prepared to say. She says them from the right in a country like France, which is very divided on left-right lines. That means, unfortunately, or it means that there are a lot of people on the left who are very averse to working with her in the way that Mark was talking about. And it's to some extent has put her in an electoral ghetto. But as I said, the fact that she is unpopular shows that she is different. And what France at the moment needs is someone different. It cannot continue in the way that it is doing at the moment. So I would not exclude the possibility of her becoming president of France one day, though it will be a very difficult process.
Yeah, first of all, let me say the idea that Marine Le Pen is unpopular in French politics is simply false. I mean, and that's completely supported statistically by the numbers. Now, France is not a 50-50 Democrat, Republican, Tory, Labor country. There in the last election, there were 5 equal spreads of about 20% across the political spectrum. And Marine Le Pen does indeed have fairly high unfavorable, what they call unfavorable ratings, where the number of people who are strongly against her is fairly high. But so, comparatively, so are her approval ratings.
Yes.
And her party's approval ratings right now are significantly higher than the sitting president Macron's, right? So it is entirely false to say that she is the most hated. I mean, obviously, some people in France hate her. I think some people have a very mistaken impression of her. Again, the whole far right thing. She is strongly in favor of a much stronger immigration control policy. But most of her economic policies are leftist. They're stated. Right?
She's a statist. She's a statist. Like
she's a de Gaulleist, right? She is actually the single most popular politician in France right now, while at the same time she may also have high unfavorables. And to see something like that, I mean, completely different political figure, but take a look at the United States, right? President Trump has a hardcore, 45% support, but extremely high unfavorables. So does Hillary Clinton. She's got a diehard, nearly half of the country supporting her, but very high unfavorables on the other side. And that's this type of polarizing figure. And she is a polarizing figure. But to say she's the most hated figure in France is just factually incorrect.
Well, the most hated figure in France at this moment in time is probably Emmanuel Macron.
Macron, yes.
I mean, that's the reality.
I was just about to say that. Alexander, guys, we are at 1,050 viewers right now. Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. Smash that like button. Share the channel with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Go to the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt. You can also donate to our PayPal and Patreon. The links are in the description box. And send us your super chats. We will try to answer the super chat questions and all the questions you guys send us on this live chat. Thank you for taking us to 1,000 viewers. We really, really appreciate it, guys. Peter, Trudeau. How does Trudeau get out of the Huawei incident? A lot of people are talking about it on the chat. As by the way, Peter, what does Trudeau do? What has he done?
He does exactly what he's supposed to do. Okay, he can play around all he wants with the gender pronouns and people kind and all that. Okay, that's his shtick here. But when it comes to following Washington's orders, yes, sir. When he gave that non-denial denial, we just it was just part of our judicial system and all that. No. The words come out, and you don't say no. And Trudeau showed, his lack of legitimacy, his lack of intelligence, his lack of integrity. He's just a North American Macron. Okay, I just have absolutely no respect for him whatsoever. Okay, he peddled on his family name, said all these ridiculous statements for the PC crowd. A person of no substance whatsoever. But when it comes to following the rules from the empire, he did exactly what he was told. I mean, to the point where I think he just memorized it. Just, what am I supposed to say? Here it is, sir. Okay. I mean, did you see the way he read his statement, how he answered questions, he looked like a 13-year-old boy. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I mean, it was, if there was ever the word puppet, that was it. When he was answering those questions. Alexander, you're dying to get in on this.
I agree with all of that, but I mean, it's particularly bizarre given the absolutely frightful things that Donald Trump has said about him. So, I mean, he is agreeing to the demands of a government, the United States government, whose leader has been incredibly insulting about him, basically wrecked the G8 or summit that was in Canada. It's very strange. And can I just say something? Of course, I mean, what Trudeau is doing by following the commands of the empire, as Peter put it, is of course making China very, very angry with Canada. That cannot be wise from Canada's point of view. I mean, the Canadians should not get involved in a quarrel of this kind between the US and China.
They're in this deep right now.
They're in this deep.
Foolish.
Exactly.
Absolute
foolishness. Foolishness.
Yeah, I think this is what Trudeau and the US have done here by arresting this Huawei businesswoman, this chief financial officer from China, is fabulous. I think it's great. I think that there were probably a lot of people in the Chinese government that were all too willing to say, in the face of Trump's, naked economic war on them, if we offer the U.S. a few concessions, maybe we can go back to business as normal, right? Just give him a little meat for his base. And this is exactly, of course, the wrong policy to take with the United States. And I hope the Chinese have learned their lesson from this.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, and depending on what happens with the hearing with this woman about her extradition, an American executive in Beijing might find himself in trouble. Okay?
Yeah, kidnapping a Chinese executive with the express spoken intent that it will provide leverage in economic negotiations. That's ransom. That's like mafia pirate stuff. This is absolutely insane. The United States and Canada are both going to pay for it. The Pacific economic war is back on. The Chinese people are furious. The Chinese government is going to have a hard time keeping their own population from in extreme displays of nationalism in this. Here in Moscow, what can I say? It's time to sit back and order more popcorn.
Peter, Wendy makes a
it was such a foolish mistake, because this is like a card of desperation. You play it at the end if you have to. You don't play it in the beginning. Okay, the 90-day moratorium, the timeout, the cool-off thing, it's all nonsense. It's all meaningless, okay? Trump left that summit empty-handed, all right? And now he pulls this stunt here. Very foolish thinking. I suppose John Bolton, well, he knew about it apparently. They're going to really, really regret doing this.
Yep. Can I just add something very quickly, which is, of course, that if you actually follow Chinese media, and when I was in China last year, I did get a sense on the part of some people in China that there was a sense that, the fact that the Russians had got themselves into so many difficulties with the Americans was partly of the Russians' own making. So I think the Chinese have been absolutely stunned to discover that the US is coming after them in this aggressive way. And I think it has been a huge education for them and a real shock for them. And I think it is one that obviously the Chinese population has learned, but the Chinese business community, which I saw when I was in Shanghai, was still very focused on the US. This directly goes against them. It hits them. It hits one of their own. And perhaps it is an important and useful lesson for them also.
The chatter I hear from some people, and I can go both ways on this one, depending on what happens in the next few days, is that Russiagate is basically being wound up. There's nothing there, and there's no there, and they're starting their new initiative, the new the new threat is China. The reason why I'm not all in on that is that Russophobia that has so been built up in the US and in the UK, it's going to be very difficult to walk away from that. So two enemies, okay? China and Russia. You know, I'm sure Putin and Xi are going to say, what is wrong with these crazy people?
Don't forget Iran. Don't forget Iran.
Well, thank you, Mark. And Iran as well. All right. And then you know, the South Koreans are going to have to wonder if they're Western partners who can be trusted as they engage North Korea. See, all this stuff, the law of unintended consequences, they just don't think things out. Okay, I'm sorry. The next one question.
Peter, Wendy makes a good point about Trudeau. Has this really hurt him because he does have a huge PC politically correct support base in Canada? So do you think this hurts him at all, or people probably don't care?
Well, the thing is that I have to make an admission here. I simply can't understand the people that support him. Okay, so it's a little bit difficult for me to answer that question. I think he is an abysmal politician. Okay, he's even a bad showbiz guy. I mean, there's nothing about Trudeau that I find attractive at all. Okay, and I can't understand why people like him. All right, so I have to, you know, say that, you know, I can't help you out on that. I mean, I just find him to be atrocious.
Well, Peter, I mean, you know, the answer to that real quick is liberals, right? Liberals love him. Postmodern liberals love him. But I disagree that he's not good at anything. He's a terrible president. But Peter, just take a look at the pictures from his travels around the world. He is great at cosplay, fancy dress, costumes, whatever you want to call it. He needs to give up presidency.
Yeah.
Trudeau, as a professional cosplayer, he'd be fabulous.
He's prime minister, not president.
Can I just a very quick point, which is, of course, whether or not it's good for Trudeau in the short term. The point is that it is very bad for Canada. It is very bad for Canada to be involved in a quarrel like this, in which it is antagonizing and infuriating China. China is more angry with Canada at this moment in time than it is with the United States, because of the way in which the Canadians have acted on American orders. What is bad for Canada, what is going to work badly against Canada, is in the end going to play against Trudeau. It is not the actions of a leader to do this sort of thing. A real leader acts in the interests of his country, and he has not done so in this case.
Alexander Mercouris, let me ask you a question here. I mean, recently with this, again, universalization of American law, again, trampling on everybody's sovereignty, it's one way or no way. But I mean, this is very odd to have such a high-level person from such an important company, and, you know, the daughter of somebody very, very important in China. I mean, why don't you just go after the company in court? I mean,
well, exactly. I mean, Peter, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that there are fundamental problems with doing this because, as I understand it, these are unilateral US sanctions. So there is a very powerful legal argument outside the United States that what Huawei is doing in Iran, or did in Iran, was allegedly done in Iran, was perfectly legal under Chinese law and under international law. But regardless of that, if the United States has a proper legal case against Huawei, there are legal routes to pursuing it. Kidnapping one of its executives whilst they're traveling through a third country is not the right way to do it. The United States has fomented this. It's done this with various low-level Russian business people on a fairly regular basis. It's now gone for a senior executive of not just a Chinese company, but one of the most biggest and most powerful companies in the world. So this is a major escalation, and it is a further sign not of the United States succeeding in making its law universal, because of course people all over the world are going to resist that. It is of the United States acting in a straightforwardly illegal way.
Alexander, I don't know if you caught this, but they're not actually charging her with a violation of the current unilateral U.S. sanctions. This is actually old sanctions that were ended by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action back from the Obama administration. It's absolutely absurd. It's over supposed corporate violations of doing trade with Iran years before Trump even became president. It's absolutely insane. And a big part behind this, I think, is because Huawei is such a threat to U.S. companies. They are global leaders in 5G, telecommunications, robotics. I mean, a decade, or two ago, it was always a big joke. Oh, the Chinese can make cheap consumer goods, but they can't innovate. Chinese are the innovators of the world right now, baby.
Well, there you go. I mean, I hear all of that, Mark. I mean, I'm sure you put it perfectly. You're absolutely right. Whatever one thinks of this, it is a grossly illegal act. It is illegal, whichever sanctions we use. To do it in this way was completely wrong. To have a sealed indictment, a secret indictment, to have a person arrested in this fashion, it's not a proper legal arrest. It is a kidnapping carried out by one government at the behest of another for what is clearly an agenda to knock out a technological and economic competitor.
And supposedly Trump, again, this is what is said in the Western papers. Trump didn't even know about it, but Bolton and Trudeau did. That's interesting.
Well, it is extremely interesting, and it goes back to your point that it is the Bolton administration now rather than the Trump administration. And I think we all need to keep that in mind.
Okay, Peter, Terry would like to know, what are your thoughts on the Comey redacted testimony?
This guy is a pathological liar. I mean, absolutely. I mean, what he has said about the Steele dossier through its existence to the present has changed so many times. He really does speak to whatever he twists reality in service of the people that he wants to like him. Okay, that's the liberal media. He basically will probably be singing Dixie in a few weeks, because we know that the Democrats are going to shut down all investigations into the DOJ and the FBI, though Senator Lindsey Graham says that on the Senate side they're going to keep looking around. But no, Comey is going to be one that gets away with it. He's just going to get away with it. Peter Strzok's going to get away with it. Lisa Page, Bruce Orr, they're not going to have to pay for what they did. And it really is quite obvious that you had the DOJ and the FBI pick sides in a presidential election. I don't think that's ever really happened before. And it sets a precedent that if you can do it, you can do it again, because you won't be punished for it. So this is an atrocity. James Comey has done more damage to the FBI and the Department of Justice than anyone in its history. And I would even say, including J. Edgar Hoover.
Alexander, did you manage to take a look at the documents?
Absolutely. What it seemed to me was that Comey stonewalled. I mean, he's obviously admitted that the Steele dossier was unverified, but we already knew that. And it's quite clear that the Steele dossier is a load of nonsense, frankly. He's stonewalled. He's playing for time. And, of course, the Republicans have allowed him to. They should not have called him now. They should have called him 2 years ago. I mean, after he was sacked. The point was that the Republicans lost a whole year right at the beginning of this, because they went along, a lot of them went along with this Russiagate nonsense. Now it is far too late to start bringing people like Comey before the House Judiciary Committee, asking him questions there and expecting that he's going to come up with any sort of answers. And of course, the DOJ itself is doing everything it possibly can to close this all down. The Democrats in the House are going to support them. They've said so. We will see what happens, what Lindsey Graham is able to do in the Senate. But frankly, it's looking very bleak.
Well, the interesting thing to me is that the head of the FBI, Wray, my senses, my gut tells me that he was more interested in preserving the institutions of the FBI and the DOJ because the deeper they went into this affair, the more the two agencies were out of control, just absolutely out of control. And I think he's wanting to protect those agencies over the truth. Okay, and I think that that's a gutless thing to do, but I think that's essentially what he has allowed to happen. Of course, we had the recusal of Jeff Sessions that didn't do any good at all. I mean, Trump should have just fired once he was recused himself. He should have been fired. Should just simply have been fired. Sorry, Jeff, but I didn't bring you on board to be recused. Okay. See, Trump, his biggest problem outside of some really crazy ideas is it's an HR problem. He has just got some of the weak people, people that actually have no intention of doing what he wants. And he has Bolton, people like that. You have Pompeo saying this nonsense at the German Marshall Fund. I mean, absolutely. He has a huge HR problem, and that's not going to get any better. I mean, we know that there's going to be a number of people leaving. And not all those people I actually like either. So we'll see where it goes. But this is I usually don't say these things here, but this is a presidency that is in a cul-de-sac, and I don't know if it can pull itself out.
Yeah, that's why they went after Flynn first, because Flint had already served as Obama's DIA chief, and he knew these institutions. He knew the way it worked. He could have pointed out, the deep state and done a real purge of the administration, hire deep in people. That's why they had to get rid of Flynn on these ridiculous charges first. And they succeeded. And Trump administration has been neutered and suffered neocon capture, since. And it's now nearly complete. And when even Tucker Carlson comes out and says that the Trump administration is now a failure, it's failing to live up to everything it promised, especially on foreign policy, which is what I really care about, but domestically as well. When even Tucker Carlson, abandons and washes his hands of the Trump administration, yeah, it's not looking good.
Peter, what did you make of Tucker Carlson's comment? I think watching Tucker Carlson a lot over the last year, I think he's very frustrated, especially more on the immigration side of things. What's your take on it?
No, I watch every episode of Tucker Carlson, and if he has somebody guest hosting for him, I usually don't watch it. I don't think anybody should be surprised whatsoever. I think it was a Swiss interview. I don't think any of us that watch Tucker on a regular basis should be surprised at all. He shows his frustration all of the time. And immigration is one of them. I give him kudos for pushing back against people like Max Boot and others of his ilk. I mean, I have a lot of admiration for Tucker, a lot. And I don't think any of us that know of his work in journalism should be surprised that he's frustrated with Donald Trump. He's really frustrated with the Republican Party also, okay? Tucker Carlson, I'm a conservative, he's a conservative. I don't think he has anything to do with the Republican Party. I certainly don't, okay? So I thought it was kind of a breath of fresh air and kind of a summation of what I've been watching over the last, he's been on now his program for 2 years now. So I think it was a good summation. No surprise.
Mark, Liberty Cat wants to know very quickly, what is the Ukrainian president's political affiliation?
The Ukrainian president, well, the quote president, unquote, Petro Poroshenko is an oligarch. He is one of the richest men in Ukraine, and he was also the principal financial backer, domestic financial backer. Other governments were involved of the Maidan Putsch. The protests and the violence and the storming of the government, and of course was later quote elected unquote the president. And he doesn't really have a political affiliation. He is a sheer opportunist. There is no question that there was a Banderite fascist vanguard on the Maidan that helped bring this regime to power and keeps it there. And there are a number of figures like Andrei Parubi, the Speaker of the Rada, Andrew Boletsky, and others that are clear outright fascists in the Ukrainian government. Petro Poroshenko, the president, is not one of them. He's just a simple, power-hungry oligarch opportunist. A lot of people forget Poroshenko served in the previous administration, in the Yanukovych administration. He served in the administration before that of the Orange Revolution, and he served in the administration before that. He is the purest definition of the word oligarch, in that he uses his political reach to enrich himself, his family, and his friends. And he's desperately trying to hold on to power. Right now, he is the nominal head of his own political party, which is named, non-egoistically enough, the Petro Poroshenko bloc, right? I mean, you name your political party after yourself, you've got a bigger ego than Trump, and that's pretty hard to do. But his approval rating now is what, 8%? 8% going into elections next year, which is what this, the whole Sea of Azov thing, as far as I can tell, and the martial law, declaration of martial law, is about. His biggest opponent is another of the nominal politicians of the Maidan, another oligarch, the gas princess Yulia Tymoshenko, who is more of a nationalist populist, and she's a complete wild card. But she's no friends of Poroshenko. And the other figures, there's an actor running, there's another of other fringe figures with no political experience that are doing better than anyone, better than most of the other political figures.
And Yulia Tymoshenko is acceptable to Washington. I have no doubt.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, Poroshenko was, of course, the most. I mean, Washington would like to see Poroshenko continue. But he's also proved incompetent. But they just don't have anyone good at this moment to replace him with.
No. I mean, can I just say one thing, which is, again, building on what Mark said. I mean, Poroshenko was a very effective backstairs manipulator in the absolutely dysfunctional politics Ukraine has had since 1991, when it became independent. When he moved into the foreground and became president, the sense of self-interest, of greed, and of incompetence that he actually embodies became altogether too public, even for the people of Ukraine. If he'd stayed in the background, pulling the strings, funding these far-right Nazi and fascist and Banderite groups, well, there he was in his element. But as president of Ukraine, he has been a total failure, even from his own perspective.
You could say all those things about Yanukovych as well. It's something about Ukraine. Yep.
Absolutely. Whereas Tymoshenko does have, we're going to be frank about her, she does have certain political skills.
Absolutely.
Skills,
Absolutely.
I mean, she's a more formidable politician than Poroshenko is. And in some ways, I think she could turn out to be a more dangerous one. So people who think that swapping Tymoshenko, having Tymoshenko in place of Poroshenko is going to make things better and less dangerous in Ukraine, I think that's wrong.
She's a wild card. I think.
Well, no one knows what she's going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time that I'm not sure, but people in Moscow said that Putin actually preferred to do business with her.
Because you can do business.
Yanukovych, right? But she is a political creature. She'll do whatever is in her best interest. The big difference is she's between her and Poroshenko. They're both opportunistic, power-hungry oligarchs. She's got better political instincts and more charisma than he does.
Yes.
All right, from Freddie, have you guys got anything good or positive to say about Ukraine? Who wants to field that?
Sorry for
I will field that. This is, absurd. My wife is Crimean. We have family all over East Ukraine. Kharkov, Odessa, Donbass. I have lots positive to say about Ukraine. Not a whole lot in the last 4 years, other than the resistance in Donbass. But of course, I am intimately connected with Ukraine, and there is much that I like about that country, past and even present.
I agree. I mean, before 2014, I used to go to Ukraine a lot. I mean, I always looked forward to going to Kiev. Such a warm city, not welcoming people. You could speak Russian there then. Nobody raised an eyebrow at all. It was very, very inclusive. So, I mean, to see these hostile elements that are supported by outsiders, particularly the United States and the European Union, I think is really a shame. I think, you know, Ukraine just has the ultimate problem of governance. Just have, you know, and you know what? I think we've said it before. Their biggest missed opportunity was their own Putin to get these oligarchs out of politics. Okay, and that is the single biggest failure of Ukraine's political development, getting all of that filthy money out of politics, because the state is just held hostage. It is just a vessel. It's a tool for a small number of people to really enrich themselves at the expense of the public.
Yeah, I mean, other than just the oligarchs, you know, and obviously the problem there with corruption that is eternal to Ukraine. The other problem is, of course, is that Ukraine is an identity divided country, largely east-west, not entirely, but largely east-west on geographic lines. The West Ukrainians, you know, a big part of it, former Galicia, that wasn't part of Ukraine up until the Stalin era. They were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They have an extremely anti-Russian sense of Ukrainian identity. Now, in East Ukraine, they're the complete opposite, right? They regard Russians. I mean, first of all, you know, over a quarter of the population is ethnic Russian, and a large portion of the rest of East Ukraine regards Russians as their fraternal, you know, brother people. You know, the number of families on both sides of the border, Russian families with Ukrainians, Ukrainians families with Russians. You can't even really tell what's Russian and what's Ukrainian, you know, in that part of Ukraine at all, right? You know, my own family has mixed Russian, Ukrainian, Tatar, Uzbek. You know, it's all mixed together there. They're, you know, true children of the Soviet Union and you know, the former Romanov Empire in that point.
And you know, and it wasn't up until the Orange Revolution, but particularly with the coup in 2014, is that so many people never had to think about these things. They weren't forced to think about their identity. Okay, and what you have is with this coup regime, they have, and this is really remarkable. They are pursuing a nationalism without a nation. And this is what they need to create it. And they're going to do it through violence if necessary. So, you know, keep that in mind, a nationalism without a real nation. And this is what really, one of the issues that really plague Ukraine, because people were not forced to identify themselves. In the West, of course, they did. It was anti-Russian, the whole Second World War narrative, and in the East, it was Victory Day on May 8th. It was the wonderful day, the Orthodox Church, and as I've said before, you know, when at the height of these conflicts, I mean, in the RT newsroom, I mean, there are people in the newsroom that have their relatives in the Donbass. You know how difficult it was for them to report on that story? It's their families out there, their grandmothers, their cousins, you know, and the number of people would have to take leave because they have to bring money and food and medicine. You know, the West doesn't understand that.
Alexander, let's shift gears to Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Let Alexander do it.
Exactly. Let's go to Brexit. Who would Alexander pick for conservative leader? What do you think of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Alexander? There's an article about Farage joining the EDP. Any truth to that?
Well, we'll see what Farage does, because, of course, what Farage does over the next couple of days is going to be really important, because what we have in the Conservative Party is a massive political vacuum. Now, we have allowed the situation to go on and on and on with Theresa May. She should never become Prime Minister in the first place. When she lost, well, she didn't lose, but when the election result came came out so wrong last year. That was the time to replace her. They've never been able to come up with anybody to take over from her. We are probably now in the last days. I've said this many times, but I think now there is a general consensus emerging in Britain that if she loses the vote as badly as is expected to lose, she's expected to lose it on a Brexit deal on Tuesday. Some people are saying it'll be 100 to 200 votes against it. The majority will be 100 to 200 against it, that she will have to resign. And there is complete uncertainty, total uncertainty about who will take over. There is no real credibility on the part of anybody. And I'm afraid Jacob Rees-Mogg, firstly, he is a backbencher. And secondly, I'm afraid his premature attempt to unseat Theresa May that he launched 3 weeks ago has severely weakened his position within the Conservative Party and has made many, many people, including me, I never had very much time for him. But since then, I've doubted his judgment and his capacity even more. I mean, to me, he doesn't seem to be, frankly, a serious leader. And I just do not see him as the leader of the Conservative Party. I think he is somebody who is more popular outside Britain, frankly.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you that. That was my question, because he seems to be a very prominent voice in media reporting on Brexit, and you're telling us now that his significance is outsized because of media appearances.
I think that's right. I mean, first of all, he's articulate in a kind of way, and he's somebody who writes very well. He's a very good, very, very good writer. But then many people said the same about Boris Johnson at one time. He doesn't seem to have that kind of political base within the Conservative Party, at least within the parliamentary Conservative Party, that would enable him to make a real bid for power. And he has failed to build it. I mean, he's had a year now since that election to make a real impact on British parliamentary politics, and he hasn't succeeded. Now, I say this with concern, because I don't know who's going to take over from Theresa May if she falls next week. I truly don't. I mean, I shudder at the thought that it might be Boris Johnson. I think he would be an absolute disaster, frankly.
No, Bojo!
Well, why don't you guys just finish this tragic comedy? I mean, that would be the best possible move. Okay?
It's the penultimate.
Mark actually explained the reason why it goes on and on and on, because, of course, the obvious answer is not a second referendum, which would be an utter disaster. That's simply an attempt to basically rerun the first referendum all over again, and it would create an even deeper political crisis in Britain. The solution, the classical solution in Britain now, is a general election. The problem is that the Conservative Party and the political establishment are terrified of a general election because they are afraid that Jeremy Corbyn will become Prime Minister. And they would far rather see a total crisis with Brexit and a disintegrating government than allow that to happen. And that is, as a result, we are in a total dead end.
I have a theory. We haven't heard much from Christopher Steele. I wonder if he's writing a dossier on Jeremy right now.
Oh, I no doubt.
It worked in the U.S. It worked in the U.S. Why not do it in the U.K.?
Yeah.
I think he's going to find proof that it was Jeremy Corbyn who wrote the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Well, indeed, there you go. But I mean, the other thing that's been remarkable in Britain is, as I said, all these attacks that have been leveled on Corbyn, and none of them has succeeded. I mean, if you remember, back in the summer, we had the massive anti-Semitism campaign. It is remarkable, actually, how that has fizzled out. I mean, it might be revived, but it had no traction in the end. I want no traction.
I want to plug the best article on the subject. It's written by Alexander Mercouris. It was published by Consortium News. Check it out. The only article you need to read on the topic. Excellent work.
Alexander, who is your pick, though? Who would you pick?
He's not going to let you off the hook.
Well, it's very difficult to say.
That's the question. That's the question. Who would you pick?
Who would I prefer? I have no idea. There's an MP, there's a member of the cabinet called Amber Rudd, who's said to be rather competent and rather nice. She is Remain. She is on the far end of the Remain spectrum. She's the most likable. If you're asking me as a human being, she may be the least antipathetic of them to me. She can't. No, I don't think she can lead, and she certainly wouldn't be remotely up to the challenge that lies ahead. There is this man Javid, who's the Home Secretary. I think, frankly, he's an empty suit, if I have to be honest.
Don't you see how neoliberalism destroys any sense of charisma? You know how important charisma is in the human condition and in politics through history? Is so very important. Okay, and look at these people. Look all through the European Union. They tried to create a charismatic figure with Macron, but when pressed, when the metal meets the meat, there's nothing there. Okay, extraordinary.
I think it could be Javid simply because he is somebody who has no enemies, who's not taken any very strong positions on any subject, and the Conservative Party will probably go for him, which will mean we will have a Theresa May Mark II.
Alexander, I want to put you on the spot. Yeah. If you could choose the British Prime Minister tomorrow,
I've known that's easy. Jeremy Corbyn.
All right, just want to make sure.
He is the outstanding political leader in Britain today. But I was asked a question about who would I pick amongst. I understood it to be amongst the Conservatives. I mean, there is no Conservative I like. Jeremy Corbyn is the outstanding political leader in Britain.
Wow.
He's a leader. He is a leader. I mean, the very fact that he's survived every conceivable attack on him says the story itself. He's also got agendas and policies and a program. I mean, none of the others do. So
an outsider looking in, I know his politics. I know it very well, and I agree on many things in the foreign policy. I agree with. But one of the things I like, just from visuals, is that everywhere he goes in public where he's filmed, people they go towards him. They are attracted to him.
Yes.
Okay. And with Theresa May, there's almost like it's Theresa May. Okay. Who wants to shake her hand? I mean, Jeremy, I've seen. It's amazing some of the rallies he's gone to. He just puts his arm around someone, people just embrace him. Okay.
Well,
there's something to that. Okay.
Well, she's been referred to in Britain. She's often referred to as the Maybot, the robot. So she's the Maybot, the person who has no warmth or human personality about her. And you're absolutely right. I mean, he has that kind of charisma. He's also likable. I mean, I know people who know Jeremy Corbyn, and they all tell me the same thing. He is actually a very likable and, dare I say, nice man at the same time as he's actually a very strong man. I mean, he's got a political direction.
Alexander, can I just stop you right there very, very quickly, because I'm looking at the chat. What do you make, though, of a lot of the fears of Corbyn's policies? I mean, and I think there is a lot of legitimacy that people are afraid of how he will run the UK, that he may run it into the ground.
Yes.
I mean, there is that fear.
Yes, you see, the concern I have with that is that we are already being run into the ground. I mean, I don't know how this is going to work out with if we have a government that is a disaster, but which is perpetuated indefinitely because of fear of something worse, which is what Corbyn might result in. Then, as I said, we're just going to continue this disaster indefinitely.
Sounds like Corbyn.
Yeah, exactly. If Corbyn becomes prime minister and he fails, which is possible, then we move on to something else. That is how it works in Britain. I mean, he loses a vote of confidence. There is another election. We move forward. What we cannot have is this dead end situation, which is the one we have at the moment. And I mean, goodness knows, I don't know how a Corbyn government will work out. I should say that his policies seem to be much more moderate, at least his economic policies, than people are saying. One should not, to my mind, let oneself be overly influenced by some of the exaggerated scare stories that have been circulating about his economic policies, especially, which seem to be much more measured than some people are saying. But if it fails, it fails. But at least, you know, we move forward.
Alexander, but if Jeremy Corbyn was elected and allowed to live to become prime minister, he would be more at war with the British deep state on foreign policy than Trump ever was.
Well, this is actually, in my opinion, I mean, put aside the economic policies, where, as I said, I don't think that they are, in fact, anywhere as near as dangerous or as extreme as people are saying, but I don't think they're extreme at all. The real problem is foreign policy. And that is where you're absolutely right. I mean, Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, wrote an article in the Daily Telegraph during last year's general election in which he said Jeremy Corbyn is a clear and present danger to Britain.
Well, that's why I like him. That's why I like him, because the deep state.
I mean, he's against all the interventionist wars. He is hostile to the European Union. That's the reality of it. The deep state in Britain is very strongly in favor of the European Union. He's had a complicated relationship with NATO. He's made it fairly clear, though he's had to say less about it recently, that he wants better relations with Russia. So this is anathema to the deep state. It is anathema to the British establishment, and that is the major cause of the opposition to him. It is also, I have to say, anathema to 3/4 of the Labour Parliamentary Party.
On top of it.
Yeah.
All right, Susan, thank you for your super chat. We really appreciate it. And Peter, more deplatforming. We had Patreon deplatform BitChute. They deplatformed James Alsop, and Tim Cook gave a speech. Yep. He gave a speech where he said, and I'll summarize it pretty much in a couple of words: if you don't buy into our dogma, we're coming after you. We don't want you on Apple's platforms. And this is very serious, because to me, when a company like Patreon or PayPal starts to deplatform you, that means they're going after your source of income. This is not just about being on social media. Now they're going after how these creators make money. What's your take on this and what Tim Cook said?
In Milo's financial problems now being deplatformed, you know. The sad thing about it is that people are getting used to it. Censorship is acceptable, apparently, particularly if it's of conservative voices, because most of the people that run these companies, own these companies, are liberals. Okay, they're not going to stand up for freedom of speech. And I think it's going to happen even more. We always have to be, even us, we have to worry about. But it seems to be a trend, and we've talked about it before. Alex Jones was the test case. Nobody came out, virtually no one came out to defend him. And that test case worked in their favor. Tim Cook is going to tell me what hate speech is. What authority does he have to tell me what hate speech is? What gives him that right? All right, it is a terribly difficult thing to define. I think it was William O. Douglas in a 1971 pornography case, and he was asked. He says, "You know, what is pornography?" And he gave the best answer. He said, "I know it when I see it." And that's the same thing with hate speech, okay? It's hard really to define, but you know it when you come across it, okay? But these are platforms. Okay, now they're editors. Well, then they have to be adjudicated differently in the public square. You can't have both at the same time. And that's what they want. They want their cake and eat it too. So we're on a very, very bad path. And it's because these companies are owned by these liberal forces. And on top of it, feckless Republicans, I'm making a separation here from conservatives. The powers that be, they don't want to regulate it. They want them to to promote their ideas, okay, what they find is acceptable. You know, Republicans would love Facebook to love them to promote their agenda, all right? So there's going to be a lot of hesitation going out there to regulate them, though there are individuals that are making, we go back to Tucker Carlson, he brings them on his program once in a while, but we should all be terribly, terribly concerned about it. And there's not enough concern, really, unfortunately.
I don't think we should underestimate how efficient and how brilliant it is for the U.S. deep state to outsource their censorship to private big tech companies like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Google and so on. If you really want to understand how close the U.S. deep state and these big tech companies are right now and how terrifying this is, please go back and read. Julian Assange wrote an article, Google is not what it seems. It was originally published in Newsweek. You can still find it there. WikiLeaks has it on their own website as well. And Julian Assange talks about how a group of people who were both executives of Google and members of the U.S. deep state bureaucracy, right, came to him and tried basically to co-opt him as one. And he came to understand how closely they were operating together and how Google is actually financing, color revolutions and meddling in other countries' affairs through small organizations of their own on behalf of the U.S. government and their vision of the world in places around the world. It's truly the most terrifying thing that I've read, because these people at Google and so on are far better at it than many of the people in the U.S. intelligence services.
How powerful do you think Google is, Mark?
Oh, most powerful company in the history of the world.
Yeah, right there. I mean, Zuckerberg is a close runner-up, but when you consider everything that Google Alphabet actually holds at this point, they come out on top. And the worst thing, of course, is through the Atlantic councils and they're all starting to work in concert.
And keep in mind, everybody watching this, people, my friends here, Alex, and Mark, and you people watching it, we're a finite number of people. Silencing all of us is not going to be very hard at the end of the day. I'm sorry to give you the bad news, but we have public profiles. It's easy to find out what we're doing, what we're saying, and we're a small group of determined people. And they have the tools. Oh, yeah, they have the tools. So we live in a very dangerous time.
Alexander, you want to comment on this?
No, I absolutely agree with this. All I would say about this is, of course, that whenever there is censorship, and we do move towards a censorship situation, through, even if it's being done, outsourced to various companies like Google, then of course there is eventually a reaction. I mean, you get time for samizdat things, and there is a limit to how far you can control them, because of course Google, if it is used to police the internet, it will provoke other people in other places to set up alternatives to Google, which will eventually gain traction. The same thing will happen with Facebook. The same thing will happen with all the others. It will take time. It will be very difficult to organize, but it always happens. Now, I've also, if you remember, Alex, we also did a discussion about this in a program in which I said that if Google and all these people start behaving, instead of being acting as platforms, they make themselves, in effect, publishers by deciding what they will allow and what they will not allow, then they become more vulnerable to future legal challenges. Now, I know many people are cynical about this, but it is not something one should hold down.
But I, in principle, I agree with you. But I mean, earlier we spoke, all of the wrongdoing, probably criminal wrongdoing in the FBI, the DOJ, they're just going to let it go. Okay, so I'm not so convinced. when you have Google stuffing money in everyone's pocket in Washington D.C.,
yes.
I'm not optimistic.
Can I point to one important difference, which is, of course, if we're talking about the DOJ and the FBI in Russiagate and all the things that were done then, the fundamental problem is that is a criminal issue which requires prosecutorial initiative. In every Western country, it is the state that has the prosecutorial monopoly. If we're talking about potential antitrust actions or civil actions under First Amendment rights, that can be brought by any individual. It then turns on the courts. Courts are far more dispersed institutions. Trying to control every judge is not so easy. And of course, that is why I say that there is more risk for organizations like Google and Facebook and the rest, if they continue to go down this road, than perhaps might appear. I am not going to try and overstate the likelihood of this. I don't know whether it's going to happen, but legally speaking, the potential is there.
This is going to be a surprise, but I'm far more pessimistic than Alexander on this, and cynical. Here's the problem: is that these giant tech companies, Google, Facebook, and others, they have more money than God at this point. And not only are they able to buy politicians, but they are all able to identify and buy out any potential competitors and technologies way before you or I have ever heard of them. And the number of people who are, us and our followers, you people out there, and like minds, say Jimmy Dore, right, left, sides of the spectrum, who are looking for alternative sources and alternative political conversations, are a distinct minority. And when you're talking consumer power, the majority of people are just happy continuing with Facebook and Twitter and these other things that are doing this mass censorship. If we are censored and fractionalize off into tiny little corners of the dark web and the modern equivalent of little MIRC channels and so on, we will find a way to reach out and communicate, but we certainly won't have any reach or praxis. Well, I think the tech political censorship dystopia is already here. And there's very little that we can do systemically against it.
Well, can I say something about that, Mark? Because, of course, I've actually I was involved, for example, in some of the actions that involved the tobacco companies, who also had gigantic resources and had, by the way, the support of governments, in fact, which isn't widely known, but they did. And yet, eventually, it broke it down. And, of course, the same has happened with oil companies. The original antitrust actions were based around oil companies. I am not as pessimistic as you. I think that eventually things do start to break down. I am under no illusions about the challenges ahead.
I think all of us want to hope you're right, Alan.
Right. Yes, please, may be wrong. Yes.
And the other thing just to say is, of course, Google is an enormously powerful company. It is not the world. The world is, as we've discussed many times, becoming more diversified. There are different poles. There is now a Chinese web. Essentially, there's going to be a Russian web. We're not talking about a situation where the entire internet can be controlled any longer from one place. So let us not give way to despair. I think that there is hope, but I'm under no illusions about
you're the man in the UK and going through Brexit. Let's have hope.
A prediction: within 15 years, we will have a Western internet, a Chinese internet, a Russian and Eurasian internet, and most likely an Arabic internet as well. And we will all be separated from each other. And we will tell our grandchildren about the golden days of free information and communication on the internet.
Well, we'll see. Well, it's a prediction that may come true. Let's see. Let us see. But as I said, I'm not prepared to give up hope at this moment.
All right, let's do a super chat. We have a super chat from Miss K. Peter. Do you have any doubts about the spontaneity towards the yellow vest movement? It makes the appearance of a color revolution for me.
No,
Would you think it was a color revolution?
No, I think that this is genuine, and I'm very happy about it. Of course, I abhor the violence. As I've put on Facebook, I mean, these are working people, a lot of working poor people defending their nation, their culture, their civilization. You know, so these smashers, I have nothing to do with them, and they should be prosecuted, okay, for doing that. The vast majority of it, from what I can see, it is spontaneous. I mean, the fact that I just love this idea about the yellow vest. All drivers have to have one. They're less than £1. They're really cheap. You didn't need Soros to give them out to everybody. They already had them, okay? And the symbolism is amazing. You know, you put it on when you're in trouble. Well, they're in trouble, and you put it on because you don't want to be run over, but they're being run over. It's a perfect match. So I don't see any conspiracy there at all. And I don't see why these conspirators would want to undermine one of their own boys, okay? And I use the word boy appropriately, Macron. You've got to give me some more dots to connect to come to that a different conclusion.
Mark, is it a color revolution or not?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I mean, color revolutions are supported by the U.S. and its allies, and Macron is their little, biatch in France. So, little disagreements between globalist France and nationalist Trump aside, we're talking regimes, we're talking deep states. It's not just about the personalities at the forefront. And, this is destabilizing the Fifth Republic. And it's absolutely not something that they want. And of course, you could believe Max Boot at the Washington Post, who says that Putin and Alexander Dugin are behind it, as if the two have been in common with him. Or BuzzFeed, who says that it's actually Facebook. Facebook is doing it. It's simply the existence of the platform that is causing all of this. I don't buy either one of those. And solidarity with the French working class people.
If there was an organization behind it, we would not only have some signs of that organization, but we would have leaders who were being put forward to take over. When we saw the color revolution in Georgia, we had Saakashvili. When we saw the color revolution in Ukraine, we had a whole galaxy of people. We had Yatsenyuk, we had Klitschko, we had all of those people being pushed forward so that they would be leveraged into power and would be able to take over. The same happened in Serbia with Kostunica taking over from Milosevic. The very fact that we have no names, that there is no discernible leadership to this movement, is a sign that it is not a color revolution. And of course, nobody in the United States deep state would want to overthrow Emmanuel Macron, who is one of their own. Certainly not in a situation that might result in Marine Le Pen taking power. I mean, that is just not their agenda at all.
All right, we have a £5 super chat from Afterglow. Alexander should model the T-shirts. All right.
Ooh.
Alexander, you should model the T-shirts. It'll increase sales.
I think that's a great idea. I will chip in money to see Alexander model our T-shirts.
Okay.
All right, guys, and you can buy those T-shirts at the Duran shop. 20% off as well for all of December. So buy a shirt, give one as a gift. They're really, really nice shirts, really good quality. Also, smash that like button, share the channel with your friends, subscribe if you have not subscribed, and you can also donate to the Duran. You will find links in our PayPal and Patreon page. In the description down below, links to our PayPal and Patreon page. I always get that part mixed up. Alexander, what's an update on Assange? A lot of people are asking, what's the lowdown on Assange?
Well, we are waiting from one day to the next to see what's going to happen. I mean, it is very ominous. I think we discussed fairly recently Lenin Moreno. This is the right-wing president of Ecuador, who turned against completely Rafael Correa, who was his original patron and who was the president who gave Assange asylum. Anyway, Lenin Moreno has claimed that he has arranged this deal with the British whereby Assange would be not at risk of the death penalty if the British extradited him anywhere. And I think I pointed out in the previous program that this isn't actually a deal at all, because what Moreno claims to have negotiated is already British law. But the fact that Moreno is talking in this way means that he is now looking for a pretext to rescind Assange's asylum grant and to evict him from the embassy. And all the people who Assange knew at the embassy and who were on his side have now been taken away. And Moreno has put his own people there. And I think we are now simply in a situation where there is a, if you like, a game of cat and mouse being played. People are waiting for Assange to do something, however trivial and however minor, which will be used to justify cancelling his asylum. And he will then be thrown out of the embassy. He will be arrested by the British. The British will put him on, will put him in prison on this charge that he jumped bail for an extradition in an extradition case which has collapsed. But they will put him in prison for that. The US
he was never charged. I gotta always remember that.
Oh, absolutely. And then the US will apply for his extradition on this secret indictment that's been held back to us. And I predict that within the next few months, he will be in the United States.
Before Christmas.
That's quite possibly before Christmas. We shall see.
Yeah, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I think Julian Assange should walk out of the Ecuadorian embassy into the arms of the British police and eventual extradition to the United States, secret grand jury trial, whatever. He should walk right into it. He should become a martyr at this point because he's not doing himself or anyone else any good as he is. He's been essentially locked up for a decade, almost a decade now. He's been held incommunicado without any internet, without any communication. WikiLeaks will continue regardless. I think he should expose the Western governments and media for exactly what they are, and try to meet them and become the Christ figure martyr that we all need for the age that we're moving into.
Yes, Mark, I know that there are people who are saying exactly that in Britain, by the way. I mean, that is the view. Of course, it is not something anybody can actually advise Assange to do. At least his lawyers cannot advise him because from a legal point of view, that would be the equivalent of committing legal suicide because, as I said, he would find himself in the United States and he would be facing a life sentence there.
If not assassination.
But politically, one can see a very compelling argument behind that, given the overwhelming probability that he will be sent to the United States anyway. And I know there are some people, as I said, who are suggesting this, but to actually ask Assange to do that, as I said, his lawyers are not going to tell him. Whether any of his political friends are advising him to do it, I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how could you advise someone personally, right? I mean, I support Assange, but could I look him in the face and said, sacrifice yourself for us all at this point because you don't have a life anyway? Well, I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate.
No,
Peter, what do you make of that, Peter? Do you think Assange could become a martyr for free speech?
Well, he already is a martyr for free speech because they think anyone that has paid any attention to this story here, that his human rights and civil rights have been grossly violated. The UK blatantly breaks its own laws. We have media that won't even say a peep about him other than, he should get the death penalty, he should be shot. Hillary Clinton says, can't we just drone this guy? I understand Mark's position there because I've said every time we talk about Julian Assange that I have no optimism, zero. I mean, bad things are going to happen. Bad things have happened, are happening, and will happen. Okay, because nobody has any kind of moral standing anymore. It's a closed circle. You know, rivals, they all come together in going after Julian Assange. Okay, and look at people like Luke Harding. It's made a career. I mean, first of all, his career was pumped up because of Julian Assange, and now he's made it his career to do everything in his power to destroy him. That's somebody in the media. Okay. Yeah. So I understand Mark's position. I think Mark is absolutely right. At this point in time, why continue the misery? But he already is a martyr.
Yes.
For people that care. The people
I mean, the great attraction, the great political attraction of what Mark is suggesting is that it gives him the initiative. It takes the battle to the enemy, as opposed to Julian Assange hiding in the embassy, waiting for them to come after him. As I said, I've heard that there are people who are actually advising, who are, prepared to look him in the eye and advise him to do that. But no lawyer can do that. Politically, as I said, it has attractions.
Alexander, but if you're considered an enemy combatant, as we basically had Pompeo say when he was head of the CIA, enemy combatants, how are they treated? I don't even know.
Oh, no.
There are people, the whistleblowers, that have explained how enemy combatants are treated.
Yeah, we know that. Gitmo. It's Gitmo.
Mark interrupted me, but it's called Gitmo. Okay. One thing is for sure, they don't want an open trial. No way. No. They want his sources. And if they get their hands on him, they will do anything to get Julian Assange's sources. That's what they want, because they know they can have a secret trial where the evidence is kept secret. The judge will say, I can't show the jury, I can't show Assange, and I can't even show his lawyer.
Peter, I think they already got Seth Rich.
Practically speaking, let's follow this line a little further down. It does get captured by the UK police and then gets extradited to the US. Practically speaking, what are we looking at for Assange? Is he going to Gitmo? Are they going to interrogate him? What are we speaking about practically for Assange? What is he facing?
No, he would not be sent to Gitmo. I mean, Gitmo is not for people like Assange. He would be tried in the United States under American law. He would not be treated as a prisoner of war.
In secret or in public? In secret or in public? What do you think?
You see, the problem is we don't know exact nature of the charge, but on the assumption that it is going to be based on the Espionage Act and that it will contain classified information, largely one suspects in secret. I mean, maybe not entirely in secret, but largely in secret. And if he is found guilty under the Espionage Act, he could be facing a life sentence. I mean, there could be a series of appeals under the First Amendment on the grounds that he's a publisher. We would see how that went. That could go all the way up to the Supreme Court. There would be a protracted legal battle. But the important thing to understand is he would be in prison during all that time.
He would not be sent to Gitmo. He would be sent to one of America's secret political prisons that are called communication management units. Look it up. It's a real thing. It's been reported in the mainstream press. This is where the U.S. sends what they consider political extremists so that they cannot excite their followers, other people like minds. They go into a communication black hole, and that's where he will spend his time. They're called communication management units. They're the U.S.'s secret political prison.
Exactly. And it is important to stress, if he is convicted under the Espionage Act, his ability to communicate will be basically taken away. He will not be able to do something like what Manafort has just done, which is issue a public statement saying that he did not meet with Assange. I mean, Manafort is allowed to make public statements even though he is in prison. Assange will not be. Because, of course, because of the nature of the case that is being brought against him.
Peter, what do you think the media's reaction would be?
Thank you. God, we're all thinking all alike here. The interesting thing is, I agree with Alexander Mercouris has a legal mind, so I'm going to defer to him. But the interesting thing is that if Julian Assange does surrender himself, or he finds himself in the custody of the British, it's going to be very curious how the media is going to react, because it's going to be us, it's going to be Consortium News, I'm sure antiwar.com, 21st Century Wire, I can go on and on, okay? We will be obviously very vocal, depending on how much information will be made available. And I'm sure we'll be able to complain about that. But it will be interesting. We already talked about tech tyranny. I have a question, a rhetorical question. Have what we've seen over the last few months of censoring people on social media, is his capture going to create the next purge, really big wave, just to push people out of the public square? And I think that it's very interesting timing going on here. We see the tech companies go after Alex Jones, then one after another, the political dissidents of the world, they're slowly gotten rid of. Julian Assange will be a very important moment for them to turn the switch on a lot of alternative media. That's my prediction here. They're not going to want people to talk about this, okay? Because it's so blatantly obvious. This is a violation of so many different laws, and most of all, a sense of morality. Okay, I can't overstress that. What's being done to him is wrong.
Well, you're right, Peter, but to come back to your point about how the media will react, the mainstream media in Britain will overwhelmingly support the action that is being taken against Assange. That will be true of every part of the media. It will be true of British television, of the BBC, of ITN News, of all of them, Sky News. It will be true of all the newspapers. All the mainstream newspapers are already monolithically opposed to Assange. So will most of the political elite. There may be a few people around Jeremy Corbyn who are unhappy about it, but everybody else will be determined to see him sent away to the United States. And we will probably get a torrent of criticism and abuse of him too. And all kinds of stories will be spread all over the British media, various hit pieces saying he's a Russian agent, dredging up the rape allegations. I predict we will get a flood of things like that coming over the next couple of weeks when he finally leaves.
But they don't want a flood of dissenting voices. That's why I mentioned.
But you know, the purge of alternative media is quite likely to happen on the back of it. And of course, if they're able to say that he's implicated other people in some kind of conspiracies, well, of course, they will make use of that too.
Alex Christoforou, what minute do you think of this podcast we got demonetized?
I think from the minute we started it.
I'm quite sure that part of what they're doing will be try to paint Assange as a Russian agent.
Oh, no question about it.
That's why I think before Christmas, Mueller report, everything will fit together. Somebody's got a big whiteboard checking off everything.
Yeah, I agree completely.
There's no doubt about this. I mean, Pompeo has already referred to him as running essentially an intelligence operation. I mean, that WikiLeaks is an intelligence agency. I mean, he said so. And they're going to try and forge links between him and the Russians. And that will be the major, that will be the major argument that will be made. And we will see it all over the media.
All right, Nicholas sent a super chat, the deep state won. What do you think about that, Mark?
What do I think about what? Sorry?
The deep state won.
Yeah, yeah, they did. I mean, Trump had the potential to be a challenge to the deep state. Yeah. Certainly the way he talked about foreign policy, when and the FBI and other things when he first took office. But he has been in turns co-opted, in turns redirected,
intimidated.
In turns neutered. So I mean, there's no question that, and I think we really can't speak of deep states because of course we're not just talking the U.S. here. The British deep state is intimately involved in everything that's going on. In fact, I think the British deep state has wagged the U.S. dog, certainly with Trump, more than anything else at this point, and is certainly the one making sure the animosities with Russia are kept up no matter what. So if anything, the British deep state may be even more sinisterly involved and more winning at this point.
And probably it also explains that Trump's public hostility towards May, because he knows that he's gotten him over a barrel and he's furious about it and nothing he can do.
I can see absolutely, with the amount of money, the control over institutions, the control over figures in the mainstream media, in corporations and the big tech companies. I don't see any way how they could not win. If anyone has any ideas out there on how seriously to beat them, and I'm not talking like sign a petition or, protest in the street, I'd be more than willing to listen, but I have no clue myself.
Well, can I take a slightly more optimistic view? The deep state,
please.
the deep state is always winning, and it never quite wins. I mean, that seems to me that's been the pattern of recent history, and in fact, the pattern of all history. I mean, they are winning. They put Trump in a box, and at the same time, we see a revolt spreading across France. We see Jeremy Corbyn, as I said, he's still leader of the Labour Party in Britain. He might be poised to become prime minister. Obviously, they will act against him, and then something else will start somewhere else. They can never completely close this thing down.
The problem
that's my positive take against your pessimistic take.
Yes, but Alexander, your optimism is predicated on a functioning public square. Okay, and that's why I'm stressing this point.
Yeah, but you see, this is the point, Peter. If you don't have an operating public square, if you don't have proper elections, because what happened in France when Macron became president was that there weren't proper elections. What you risk is that you do risk having things spreading to the streets. This is what has happened in France because the political system essentially has closed down other options. And that is what you're going to get in more and more places if you go down that road of closing all other routes down.
Well, no. Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're well on the way of creating a dystopia, okay? And it's going to be for them to manage it, okay? And it will be chaotic. It is chaotic, okay? And of course, as long as Russia is a sovereign state, it's Russia's fault.
It's not going to be, being realistic about this, it's not going to be any issues like what's happened to Julian Assange, that he's going to bring people out onto the streets. It is going to be issues like raising the price of diesel oil. That's always the way it works in every situation. But if you close down the public square, elites themselves start to lose touch with reality because they're not getting the information.
What happened with the Soviet Union?
All right, let's take a couple more super chats and close out this live. We've been going for over 2 hours. Thank you to everyone that has joined us. We've hit close to 1,300 viewers. That is awesome. Alexander, what if the Duran is censored in the US? Can your supporters get a newsletter here? I'll preface this to Alexander. We don't say the way we deliver news, guys, and Alexander, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're very rational. We try to take a very measured line in everything we do. So I don't think there's any fear of censorship.
No, I do think so.
Monetized? Yeah, sure, because we do tackle some controversial topics.
Yes.
Often we tackle controversial topics, but we try to present them in a very honest and objective format. Alexander.
Exactly. That's exactly my view. I mean, I don't think we are under any real danger of being censored any time in the foreseeable future. Now, what may happen in 5 years or 10 years, I don't know. But I think people should not give up hope or become pessimistic or alarmist. We are a news outlet. We have a diversity of opinions. We have debate on our channel. We express ourselves in a very, very measured way, as Alex said, and we base our interpretation on facts. We don't invent facts or create facts. We have our own interpretations of them. We analyze them in different ways. We don't always agree. I've just disagreed with Mark on something. So, So there's no reason why we should be censored, and I don't believe we will be.
Let me sound a voice of pessimism. I believe that Duran will be censored, within the next 5 years at some point, and there will be all kinds of attempts to slur, the individuals involved personally, or to make connections with Russia or Greece or whatnot. I don't, it's when I sound a continual pessimistic note, of course, it doesn't mean that I give up hope. One of my favorite quotes is a person asks a wise man about hope, and he says that, are you saying that hope is the denial of reality? And he says, are you saying we shouldn't hope? And he says, no, I'm saying that we should remove that hope is the carrot dangled before the mule to keep it plodding along. We should remove the carrot and walk forward with our eyes open.
All right. Peter, we have a super chat from Zariel. Peter, could you comment on Ed Snowden's status now? And we'll wrap it up with this. If you have anything to comment on, if you know anything about this.
There's nothing really new that I've heard recently. I hear he lives in Moscow, but I mean, given his own interviews when he first arrived here, he called himself a house cat. He spends most of his time at home. But I have to wonder, has he learned Russian? What does he like to do? He still does a lot of podcasts with people, but I think under his asylum agreement with the Russian government, he cannot release new information. He can talk about things that have been released in the past, but he can't be a whistleblower on Russian soil. So he has kind of a fine line. The things that I've seen him do is much more analytical. The guy is sharp. He's a very, very smart guy. Don't let his looks deceive you. He looks very young and frail, but he's got a formidable mind, and he has a real presence when he speaks. I haven't met him. I don't know where he is, and I think he more or less wants to be left alone.
All right. And guys, we will wrap it up on that note on Edward Snowden. And hope dies last. So keep that in mind. I will take more of an optimistic point of view. All right, guys, thank you for joining us on this live chat. It was a historic live chat. We broke the 1,000 viewer mark, and we took 1,000 people. Thank you very, very much. Smash that like button, subscribe, click that notifications bell, share the channel with your friend, share it on social media, get the word out about the Duran. And of course, 20% off from our Duran shop all through December. And you can donate to our PayPal and Patreon page. The links are in the description box. And also, before I forget, we have audio podcasts of all our shows. They're on iTunes and on Soundcloud. So you can also get the audio versions of all the shows that we do. And on that note, let's take a look at the week ahead. Peter, what do you see?
Tuesday's election. I can't wait for May to leave. Yes. Okay. Of course, the trials and tribulation the next couple of weeks are going to be very critical for Macron, the child king. I'll be watching that. And keep an eye on the Assange story and the Mueller report. And we're in the middle of a lot of things right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, Mark, what do you see for the week ahead?
Yeah, it's already all been said. I foresee some more snow in Moscow. And I'm going to take advantage of that to enjoy lots of long, multi-hour long walks with the dogs in the pine forest.
All right, Alexander, what are you watching?
We are drifting into a major political crisis in Britain. I don't think there's any question about this, and it'll be very interesting to see how it resolves and what happens over the course of the next week following the vote on Tuesday. France, obviously, we have to keep a very close eye on France. I mean, it seemed at one time over the weekend that the protests were going to be slightly less. It seems, in fact, on the opposite happened, that they were actually rather bigger this weekend. So we shall see what happens in France. And of course, there's the rumbles of Mueller always going on. And we've also got to keep an eye on the Middle East and on the oil situation, because the Russians and the Saudis appear to have agreed another oil deal to cut production. We will see whether that sticks and whether we start getting a political side to this, which goes beyond the present deal, which is purely on controlling the oil market. So there's lots of things going on. The world is a very busy place at the moment.
All right. Peter Lavelle in Moscow, host of RT's Crosstalk. Thank you very much. Mark Sleboda in Moscow, international affairs and security analyst. Thank you very much. And the Oracle in London, the London Eye, Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you to everybody. Have a great Sunday. Have a great weekend wherever you are in the world. Everyone, take care.